In 1950, tragedy would strike the life of Mr. Brown and the village of Tapton. While Mr. Robinson was chauffeuring his employer home at 11:30 a.m, he noticed ripples on the water of Tapton Lake. He immediately stopped the car and saw the horror of a young boy floating a few inches under the water's surface. Mr. Robinson jumped into action immediately, dragging the boy out and rushing him to Chesterfield Royal Hospital. Miraculously, although in shock, the boy survived. At the lakeside, however, police discovered a pushchair, empty, for the sake of a girl's blue bonnet. After asking local neighbours, this was confirmed to be Mrs. Brown's, the surviving boy's mother. While Mr. Brown looked on in certain shock and horror, a search and rescue was launched. After line dragging the lake all day, Mrs. Brown's body was discovered. Mrs. Brown had been dead for some time. However, her posture appeared to be frozen. A posture not unlike somebody cradling that of a baby. Mr. Brown's daughter was never found. 43 years later, myself and my mother would move into the family home of Mr. and Mrs. Brown. This is the story of our time there, from the perspective of my mother.
Okay, so it was a long time ago, like 27 and a half years ago, so I'll try and remember what I can, although a lot of it is actually like embedded in my brain. It was that bad. So we moved into the house on the 17th of May 1993. I was 18 and Luke was 8 months old. It all started on the first night that we moved in. It was the first time I'd ever lived on my own, so it was a bit weird anyway. And the first night we went to bed and I switched all the lights off and got into bed, and I could hear like a clicking noise. So I went to the top of the landing and I could see downstairs that the living room light was flashing on and off. I thought it might have been a light outside, but the position of the house, there was no other houses around it. It had a third of an acre of land around it, so it wasn't joined on with any neighbours. It was quite remote. So I went downstairs and the living room light was going on and off. I kind of tried to ignore it, went back upstairs and it continued. So I just left it, closed my eyes and drifted off to sleep. So that was the first night. After that, little things started happening. It wasn't constant, it wasn't an everyday thing, but every now and then, just like stuff that had happened that had made you question things. So one day I said to Luke, I says, come on, we're going to go to town. So put him in the pushchair, got to town, got there and my purse wasn't in my bag. Really weird, my purse was always in my bag. So I ended up coming home again, obviously, because I couldn't buy anything. Searched everywhere, hunted the house, high and low, no purse. 3 days later, got up, came downstairs, and in the middle of the living room was my purse on the floor with all the coins piled up on top. Luke couldn't have done it, he was far too young, he couldn't even walk at this point, so I had no idea how that happened and it just completely freaked me out.
That's what you think?
Yeah, you were like one.
Yeah, you've seen Rugrats, haven't you? So
definitely. And Luke, to be honest, it does look a bit like Chucky, but there you go. So other weird things that happened were like I'd be sat in the living room at night and all of a sudden I'd turn around and there was all steam coming from the kitchen and my kettle had been switched on. I'd switch it off and a couple of minutes later it had happened again, and I used to get through about 6 kettles a year because they'd just burn out. Even if I unplugged them, they'd be plugged back in, and I'd constantly have to keep water in them because I was just afraid that they were going to burn out, which they did most of the time anyway. Whenever I stuck a picture on the wall, I'd put a picture hook in, I'd just put the picture on, absolutely fine, come down in the morning, the pictures would be on the floor. I gave up in the end and just didn't bother putting any up because it was just ridiculous. In those days, because I'm quite old, we used to have TVs and they didn't have a remote control, but the channel would just constantly change. You'd be sat in the middle of watching something, it'd just turn over, you'd get up to switch it back, it'd change back. It was all very bizarre. Luke would constantly be talking to somebody. As he got older, obviously, he'd sit up in bed in the middle of the night. Luke never slept a night. Luke would go to sleep for 2 hours at a time and then he'd wake up. It was just it was a nightmare, to be honest. He was 5 before he slept a whole night. And he would sit up. He'd always sleep in bed with me, and he would sit up and just start talking. Before he could talk, he was blabbering away, but he was staring at something. And my friend Karen, she stayed over with us one night, and she woke me up and went, "Who is Luke talking to?" And I was like, "Oh, it's quite normal. He does it all the time." And she was like, "Nah, that is really weird." And as I could hear voices. There was always a voice of a man in the downstairs room. I could never tell what he was saying, but it was a deep voice of a man talking. There was always very often there'd be like a lady humming in the bathroom, which is really weird. But as soon as you'd approach to have a look, it'd just stop every time. Just trying to think. One of the weirdest things that happened was I was laid in bed, and it was about 2:00 in the morning. And every night before I went to bed, I would lock the front door, take the keys out and put them on the worktop in the kitchen. This particular night, I heard the biggest bang. It was so loud, it frightened me to death. And I went running downstairs, and the front door was wide open with a key in it, which absolutely freaked me out, because it was like, I never felt safe anyway, but that just made it even worse that somebody could, or something could open my front door. It was just really weird. As Luke got older, he used to talk to a particular person, and it would probably be about 3 or 4, and he would go upstairs to get something, and he would come down and just look at me and say, and I'm actually shaking now saying this, it freaks me out even to today, and he would look at me and he would say, "Margaret says we need to leave now." And I would say, "Who's Margaret?" And he used to repeat, "It's Margaret's house. She lives here. We can't stay here. We need to go now." And he was a little boy. It's not something a normal thing that a child of that age would actually say. But he said it on more than
horror movie stuff. That
really, it's absolutely, and it used to freak me out. I mean, he used to go to bed, and I'd not hear him come downstairs, but I'd turn around and he'd just be stood there saying, "We need to go. Margaret says go now." So you can understand probably why I didn't sleep very much as a child.
Margaret keeping him up all night.
It was definitely Margaret. So there was a lot of footsteps going up and down the stairs on the landing. Really, really weird. Especially when we was in bed and you'd hear somebody walking up the stairs. That was awful. So it was. Go on.
Was there any odd, would you recall any odd happenings prior or since moving or living in that house?
No, nothing. Absolutely nothing.
What was your sort of attitude towards the paranormal and supernatural prior to moving to the house?
Like I say, I was 18 years old. I'd never had any dealings with it. I'd not got an opinion on it. I don't think I really knew anything about it at all.
Okay. And was this your first living away from the family? Was that your first family?
Yeah,
sort of
definitely.
Okay.
First time I'd ever really spent a night on my own anywhere, yeah.
Right, okay. I'm just trying to think of tension's a little bit higher, a little bit nervous, because...
Yeah. But bearing in mind, this went on for 5 years.
Okay. See, this is where I differ from people, because it happens for 5 minutes, I'm gone.
Mm-hmm. I had no choice.
As soon as my boy is like, "Yo, Margaret says we gotta go," I'm like, "Well, we gotta go then, haven't we?"
That's right.
Yeah, I understand.
I didn't really have any choice.
Yeah, I mean, I was trying to sort of perhaps suggest that there was some sort of uneasiness in the mind at the time that sort of might have encouraged, the imagination, say, because obviously I'm coming from a more skeptical sort of
definitely.
So I was trying to think maybe where's there any sort of rational thinking behind, but it's not just you that's perhaps thinking these things up. If he's come to you talking about Margaret and he's the one staying up all night, it doesn't really matter how you feel or whether you're scared or you believe these things, because it's him that's doing all the spooky wooky stuff. So
That's right.
yeah, coming. I
So
mean,
I
I've heard brief
mentioned,
bits and bobs. Oh, sorry, carry on.
yeah.
Carry on.
No, sorry, I would say I mentioned my friend Karen earlier on. I've actually seen Karen tonight, and I said to her, "Can you remember, when I lived there?" I mean, Karen's been my best friend for over 40 years, so we've experienced everything together. And I said to her, "Can you remember when I lived at the house at Tapton?" And she's like, "Oh, please don't. Let's not go back there." I said, "Come on, what do you remember about it the most?" And Karen is the most rational person you will ever meet. She don't believe in anything, and
I can agree with that.
she's wonderful. I love her, and she reminded me of. We shared a sunbed. We split the cost in half, but I had it in my house because she lived at home with her parents. And so I would go to work, she would come round and go on the sunbed. And obviously she knew what I was telling her that was going off, and she was really, really kind of talked me around and said, "Come on now, get a grip." Anyway, and she reminded me this evening of when she was actually on the sunbed at my house, and she said she felt so uncomfortable, and to the point where she daren't open her eyes. And she forced herself to open her eyes, and she says the only way she can describe it is, when you see heat in a desert and it's all a bit wibbly wobbly.
Yeah.
She says there was a person, an outline of a person stood there, but it was all kind of moving. And she says it was like a man was stood staring at her like 3 feet away. And Karen actually grabbed her stuff, ran out the house, left the door open, and got dressed in the garden. She was that terrified, and she says she still can't even think about it because it absolutely freaks her out.
So the spooky wookies turn into the wibbly wobblers.
The wibbly wobblies.
Wibbly wobblies. Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, geez. So, did you ever find anything out about any potential Margaret or any odd happenings that might have?
Yeah. So I mean, there
left
was one day when I went. I used to work in hairdressers, so I went to work, and this is years after. I was working in the hairdressers, and I was washing this lady's hair, and she says, I was speaking away as you do, and I said, like, "Where do you live?" And she says, "I live at Tapton." I says, "Oh, I used to live at Tapton." And she asked me where, so I told her, and she said, not number 15. I said, "Yeah." She went, "Oh, why?" She was an elderly lady, and she said, "Oh, right, my husband used to work with the man who lived there." And I said, "Oh, right." I said, "Do you know anything about the family?" And she said, "I remember that the wife took the children and walked into the pond and drowned. And the mother and the baby drowned, and there was an older child that was resuscitated. Somebody found them, and yeah, but I don't know any more than that. And then the man died in an accident not long afterwards."
You told me about that before, weren't you, Luke?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
I obviously
Recall that, yeah.
from my recollection is completely wrong to what my mum said. Everything's similar, but
Yeah,
my
yeah.
recollection of it was
You
different.
were very young.
Yeah, but the intro actually covers this bit. I've got the newspaper article
Okay.
scrolling through talking about it. So yeah, the elder boy, he did drown, but he was resuscitated. Margaret was found either the day after or that evening, and the baby was never found.
And obviously, you're not to know at the time you're talking about Margaret saying you've got to leave anything about a Margaret, because Margaret
Yeah,
only
because this
comes into
happened
the
in the
picture for you
1950s.
guys years later, innit? Yeah.
Yeah,
Mm.
it's like 43 years after this
Hmm.
happened is when we moved into that house.
Hmm.
So I always said that there was a man and a woman because I could hear him speaking. One particular night, it all came to a climax one night, and then the next day it just all exploded. I'd gone to bed early. I'd got a migraine, so I was laid in bed, and I could hear Luke running around in his bedroom. Bearing in mind, I think he was about 4. Yeah, it'd have been 4, and he was running around in his bedroom. Also, I thought, I would like, for crying out loud, I need to go to sleep. My head is banging. So I got up and I went into his bedroom and I switched the light on, and Luke was fast asleep. But he had a really thick pile carpet, and you could see indentations in the carpet of like somebody running around. So I absolutely freaked out. I grabbed Luke, ran straight into my bedroom, which was completely opposite. I slammed the door. I put things up to the door. I got in bed, pulled the sheets over my head. That it laid there all night. It was absolutely terrifying. It was awful. The next day, my friend was coming to pick me up around 10 o'clock, and I couldn't wait for her to come. Literally stood outside on the street waiting for her to come, didn't want to be in the house. And it was a bit of a snowy day as well. So we went out, walked for hours, literally for hours. And she kept saying to me, if you don't want to go back to the house, you can come and stop at mine. And I was like, no, I can't keep doing this. You know what I mean? I've got a home that I'm just avoiding all the time. So went back home, made tea, went upstairs to get Luke's pajamas in this room. I was bending over in the bottom drawer getting his pajamas, and you know how when you see it on films how it goes really cold, and you see people's breath and all that when all the spooky stuff starts. That
It's a bit
didn't
of a trope in
happen.
those kind of films.
Yeah, that didn't happen. The whole atmosphere completely drained out the room. It was like there was no atmosphere whatsoever. And I just felt like the three people were stood behind me watching me. It were incredible. I ran downstairs, I grabbed Luke, like I say, it was snowing. I stuck him on a sledge. I ran down the road to my friend's house. I didn't lock the door. He didn't have a coat on. I don't even think he had shoes on. I didn't have a coat, and I just burst through my friend's front door, and I was like, please help me, I can't cope with this. And her dad had to go up. I had to give him my key out of my bag, and her dad had to go up and lock and secure the house up because I just couldn't go back. And I rang my mum. And my mum ended up ringing her friend who was a minister at Brimington Church. And he came round the next day. I met him there. I left Luke with my friend. And I had a chat with him about it. It was a family friend, so, you know, he knew I were a bit nuts anyway. So so I literally took him around the house. And he was originally from Liverpool. And he had actually experienced things while he was a minister in Liverpool. So he says, not done this for a while, but let's go around and have a look. So I took him around the whole house, and he was really interested in everything. So when we got into the bedroom, Luke's bedroom, he went, whoa. And he pointed to the corner where Luke used to stand and talk to Margaret, where I thought the people were stood behind me. And he just basically said, there is a vortex and they are trapped there. He says, I am telling you now, he says, these people do not know how to go to the other side. So he got some holy water out, which I thought was a bit weird. And he went around the whole house. But when he got to this corner in the bedroom, he was praying, and he was telling them to be at peace and go towards the light and all this. And the whole thing must have lasted about an hour in total from him getting there to finishing. But literally, as soon as he finished praying that prayer, I'm not kidding, it was like a cloud had lifted from above the house, and it was the nicest house to live in after that, and I never had any problems whatsoever.